Hello guys and welcome to today's video. This is a Mythic Plus for Legion DPS tier list. So what we're doing is leading up to the War Within, we're going to go over all the Mythic Plus like expansions. We're going through the seasons. Today we're doing Legion on the DPS specs. Then we'll do the tanks. Not today, but like the tanks and then healers over the next few days. And once we do all of it and we've gotten up to Dragonflight, because we've gotten all the information we kind of need from Dragonflight, War Within's like, 5 weeks away. So we more or less sort of know what we need to about Dragonflight and sort of what we know going into the War Within, what's going to be the go-to spec. But with that being said, once we get to Dragonflight, we are also going to do an overall history of these specs, right? And we're going to rate them in their field. We won't have like a meta, but we'll have an S tier of their history and we'll go over them in the video. That will probably be a longer video, but today I just want to say that if your spec isn't in like a good spot, you kind of know these are past expansions. You sort of knew what you had back then, and these are based off. This isn't an opinion. These are just based off the highest keys done in these expansions. So it's just one of those things. So I've done a lot of research over the last few days to sort of get everything in position to do all this stuff, right? So we're going to start off with Affliction Warlock. So Affliction Warlock is by far the best DPS spec in the entire expansion. They were in every single key. I researched up to the top 1,000 for keys done. In season 1, they were very much the go-to Warlock spec, but they were also the go-to spec in general for DPS. They brought an insane amount of damage. They brought a lot of obviously the Warlocks with the Hearthstones and Hellstones and Lock Rocks. You also bring obviously a battle res and just an insane amount of tankiness. And even more so as an Affliction Warlock. Affliction Warlocks are known for being able to have talents back then that really made them even more tankier. So in terms of the meta, they were by far the best spec in the entire game. And what I consider meta is if you're in nearly almost every single key that's being pushed and you're right there, then to me that would be the best. You're in the top best, and like A would be like you're in every few push keys, and B you're just sort of in every now and again keys, and obviously C and D you aren't really broad at all in these top keys, but you probably played in some of the lower keys. Now for Arms Warrior, also before we actually move on, Affliction actually got better for their expansion. Through Season 1, Season 2, Season 3, they were just S tier for the whole thing. And then by the time we got to Season 4, they just shot off into like this S plus sort of. There were other classes being played, so also specs in the Warlock stuff, right? Throughout those seasons, right? So Destro, Demo, they were there throughout the first 3 seasons. But by the time Season 4 got rolling around, you pretty much didn't see anything but an Affliction Warlock in a Mythic Plus key, especially in the high end of keys. And as we got through those seasons, right, so Season 1 to 3, they were doing roughly between 23s to 27s or something like that. And then they took the extra step to the 28s, which obviously if things are living long, Affliction's just pumping, right? So they really thrived on that type of environment, and it could be just down to it was just perfectly designed at that point. It stayed S through the whole expansion, which is kind of unheard of. It's kind of unheard of for a spec to stay that relevant for so long in a Mythic Plus setting. And I assume they were doing quite well in Raid as well. So they were, they're, like, you do have specs that do run through that, but yeah, it's kind of unlikely. Arms Warrior. So Arms Warrior is a solid A. They started they started their season off very well. They started around an A, and they got even better in season 2, which actually you could argue they got pushed up to an S tier type, but not quite on the level of an Affliction Warlock. Obviously, you don't bring as much as a warrior main myself. You don't generally bring a lot to a dungeon outside of a battle shout, and pretty much they were probably more of a high, very, very high A. They were very, very good, doing a lot of very good damage, and competing with obviously Fury as well. They were ahead of Fury at this point in the expansion at Season 2. Season 3 and Season 4, things sort of change around, so if Arms comes back down to sort of a mid A tier sort of spec, and then they probably fall out of favour. Some other specs get some reworks, some other specs as well, just which I don't want to name so I don't spoil the tier list, but you more or less it's a solid A throughout the entire expansion. So Arms was very good. So if we ever get a remix, Arms and Affliction Warlock, they are probably going to be some of the specs that you're going to go to. Now we got Assassination Rogue. Assassination Rogue actually didn't start off, super OP or anything like that. Rogue specs generally always have 1 or 2, even sometimes all 3 specs that are just super, super good. And obviously, they just have so much control of a dungeon. Shroud and obviously their stealth and just their whole utility, right? So with all their stuns and just their I suppose their damage is still very good too. Assassination Rogue generally didn't start off too well, but they gradually just got better. In fact, by the time we got up to Season 4, they were probably pushing closer to an S tier than people might remember. So they were very, very good by the time we got up to Season 3 and Season 4. They were very much probably better than they're probably better than Arms, I would say. They were doing more consistent keys throughout the whole expansion. As Arms had that big Season 2, and they had a big Season 2, a decent Season 3. They had a very good Season 1 Arms, but Assassination Rogue started off pretty much had the reverse of what the Arms Warrior. Arms Warrior started off really strong, and then it sort of came back down a little bit as Assassination started low and then came right up, and by the end of the expansion was doing very well. So yeah, an A tier for Assassination Rogue. So Balanced Druid. Balanced Druid is big. It is a big A tier. They were consistently an A throughout the whole expansion for me. You go and have a look at Raid.io. They were pushing the highest keys in the world. They of course were doing very good support damage for obviously they have a ram through a lot of their abilities, of course, right? Sort of like Affliction, but not really, but kind of how they sort of ramp. Same with Assassination Rogue, they sort of take a bit of time to ramp up. It's not like instant damage like an Arms Warrior or something like that, right? But they were just doing a lot of the highest keys in the world. They obviously are squishier than probably some of the specs that we've talked about so far. But they're pretty much were just super good throughout the entire expansion. By the time you get to, season 3-ish, they were just in nearly every single key. Yeah, you could probably make the argument actually that they could be put into an S tier, but not being like literally every single key, I feel like then we would have a bunch of S tiers, and it would devalue the meta sort of thing. But you could make the argument that they are in the meta or S tier. Arcane Mage. Now, the problem with Arcane is that it's competing with Fire and Frost. It's always had this disadvantage, and so I mean, it's not really their. Sorry, I'm just getting up, making sure I'm on track here. But Arcane for me is a B. Now, you could argue the argument that C, they don't get a lot of play, but I decided to put them in B. There is a lot of good feedback on their play style, but ultimately they were sort of in the middle of the pack. They weren't doing what the other two mage specs were doing. Now for their season output, it was they started around the bottom of C, and then they got a lot of play in season 2 and season 3, and then they sort of dipped down for season 4, which is kind of sort of how these things go, especially when you've got like Affliction Warlock will come up a lot in this video because they were just that dominant. So yeah, I mean, that's Arcane. It's kind of the problem with Arcane. They had pretty good single target and AoE, but I mean, if you can, a lot of the time when you're pushing the highest keys in the world, Fire will always probably come out on top. And Frost, I mean, it's much easier to play than Arcane. So even back then, even more so back then, I think it's was even more complicated, to be honest. But yeah, a bottom B, not bottom, but it's not the mage spec that you're going to go towards. BM Hunters. Now BM Hunters are an interesting one, because Hunters actually throughout the whole expansion actually were doing quite well. But you had the revamp to Survival Hunter, I believe. You also had, I think you had a rework to Outlaw Rogue. I could be wrong. You guys let me know in the comments if I'm wrong on that. But you obviously BM, one of the easier specs to play. It's probably well known for how easy it is to play. Actually started off probably pushing into an A tier. It started off really, really hot. People were playing it left, right, and center. The same with Marksman Hunter, or Marksmanship Hunter, I should say. And but they ended up for the next sort of 2 or 3 seasons, sort of coming to the power of the other Hunter specs. Now, BM was, it was still in some of the highest keys in the world, and it just wasn't as consistent. So for me, that's probably more of a BT spec. Demonology Warlock. So now, as we go over to the next 2 Warlock specs, it's obviously going to have a bit of more or less play because you're playing in. You have Affliction Warlock. Okay, it's just they were just ridiculously good. So. So for me personally, they're better than Arcane, but they didn't get a lot of play, especially in the last few seasons. Their first few seasons. Sorry, I'm looking at my list, and I've got like a whole graph sort of set out so I can remember all this stuff that I've written down. So, Demonology actually started off being around an A tier. They were getting a lot of play in the first few seasons, but as the season got scaled up, Affliction got better because things were living longer, and they generally just had way more damage than any other spec in the game. But it was always going to be hard to compete with Affliction when they were that good. So Demo is sort of a mid tier sort of B spec. By no means could you not play it in the highest keys. Even in season 4, you could. I'm sure there was people that I looked back into, I think the top 1,000, and I think maybe I saw 1 or 2 throughout that whole run, and a lot of them were either destruction or affliction. So, in fact, the first 300 or 400 rankings were affliction. So that is where that's at. And for destruction, actually is well, it's you know, if there was an affliction, guess what? Destruction would probably be either top A or S, with either, like, if there was no affliction, Boomy would probably be here, and so would destruction be up here around the mark here. But unfortunately for them, they do have that problem, and so destruction was consistent throughout the whole expansion, probably an A throughout the whole expansion. They never really dipped. They had a consistent damage. They also had a ramp as well, but they probably had, maybe they might have had better single target perhaps, but affliction was so brokenly good that it just never really went that way. And as when we get down to Shadowlands, the roles really flips. But for Legion here, they're solid. They're doing some of the highest keys in the world still, even in season 4. But unfortunately for the first 400 or 500 rankings, it's mostly affliction warlocks and pushing in those types, 28, 27 sort of types. But yeah, that's destruction. And so now we get on to the last 2 mage specs here. We got fire. So fire was ultimately doing more keys overall than destruction and arms. Could argue it's better. Like, you could argue assassination is a little bit worse, but I think they were just doing a little bit better. Just overall, there were a lot of assassination rogues in the last season, which kind of outweighed Fire. Fire was very consistent throughout their season. They were completely like destruction, thoroughly had a lot of A's, but because of the amount of specs played, like when you play Warlock, you're playing Affliction, that kind of downgrades how good destruction was. Very good, but Fire was obviously competing with Arcane and Frost, and it was easily the best mage spec of the expansion. Now moving on to Frost, we have Frost is also an A tier. It obviously had less play than Fire, but it had more play than Arcane. So it was like, it's obviously your second best. It was a mid tier. It was still doing some of the early in the expansion. It was still doing some of the highest keys. And in fact, I think there was a lot of combos where it was like Fire and Frost. So you had that combo. You had a dip in season 3 for Frost because Fire actually riz to probably nearly S tier. They were nearly in every tier, and then obviously season 4 you have Affliction Warlocks. So it's all, and actually before, it's not just Affliction Warlocks. There was actually a certain revamp to a certain spec that we'll get onto in the later in the video. That actually got a big rework and actually shot them into the meta category for that season. So, and that is what was one of the things I was very surprised about actually by doing all this research. So next we got Marksmanship Hunter. So they're actually they're actually better than so my list here. They were doing some of the highest keys in the world again. Like, they were doing a lot of keys, and a lot of the highest keys in the world. And throughout the entire expansions, they never had a dip. They were more consistent than the BM Hunter, and they just did more damage. They had a very big burst. A very big burst window. Not good enough to be like an S tier or better than Boomy in my opinion, but going off the information, they were very good. I mean, you had some like well-known guys like Now and Ginny. They were having this combo, obviously, with Ginny playing Marksman Hunter back then. So that is pretty much that for Marksman. Like, they were doing some of the highest keys, and they just consistently stayed an A, and they were a very good option. They were very probably, your second or third, depending. Like, most comps were probably running obviously an Affliction Warlock, maybe a Boomy, and like a version of a Hunter. Or if you weren't doing that, you were swapping out the Boomy for a Rogue, just to split up the different ranges and stuff like that. So that's pretty much Affliction. As we get on to, what is it, Outlaw Rogue. Outlaw Rogue, to me, was, what did I do? I did that it was fairly high B. So throughout the expansion, actually, Outlaw Rogue, trying to find it here on my list, was pretty consistent actually throughout the first half of Legion. First half of Legion, they were probably in the A tier there, but actually probably suffered due to how good the other two rogue specs got in the end. They were probably, it's that thing I talked about earlier where DPS classes that have 3 specs are always competing. Generally you're always competing, whether it's a tank or a healer spec. You're always competing. There's always a meta, and at the moment, I haven't gone over the healers or the tanks, but evaluating that there will always be someone that's not getting played as much. And I was probably a bit more lenient on an Outlaw because it does have a lot of good utility, and I'm pretty sure it had its rework or actual revamp and not a rework. It completely overhauled it from combat to Outlaw, right? And I'm pretty sure that happened in Legion, but I could be wrong. Someone let me know if I'm wrong about that. And so, Outlaw consistent, and in the late part of the season, obviously, Sub and Assassination really took off, and Outlaw sort of got hurt by that. But, like I said, BT, people were still playing all these classes that are in BT. I mean, most of the people were playing all these specs that are going to be listed anyway, never whether they're in D or A or in S. They're sort of that's just sort of where they're at, right? That's just sort of what they've ranked due to what was in the meta, right? So Survival Hunter. Now, if I'm right about this was when they got their revamp, not rework, right? To me, they were competing with the other two Hunter specs, and a lot of people weren't very positive on the Survival Hunter revamp. And so they started out the season, and they had like a very up and down, up and then down. They started down, and then they got up, and then they just were down for the rest of the expansion in terms of keys pushed. They did have a few in the first 500, top 500 in Season 3 and Season 4, but it was mostly dominated by marksman hunters, and mostly BMs were doing more keys too, but for the most part, it was mostly, survival hunters were suffering that effect. Shamans, so we're into the 2 DPS Shaman specs. Now, these didn't get a lot of high keys, but they did get some high keys, mostly throughout the first 3 seasons, I would say, where they were getting a lot of play. Obviously, that last season there was reworks to certain specs, and obviously certain specs were just doing a lot insane amount of damage. Everything above it was doing more damage, and Shamans generally are a fairly squishy class, like even back then. So pretty much I would say Elemental Shamans. Probably B for most of the expansion, and then probably dipped because a lot of the meta's just sort of stuck, right? Certain things got reworks and stuff like that, but also, while we're on the Shamans, we might as well do Enhancement Shaman, and Enhancement Shaman obviously suffers the effect that Elemental was better, and at this point I think Enhancement wasn't getting a lot of good rep. Like the first few seasons, they go up, and then they stay down, they go up, and then they go down, and then they go down more. And then by season 4, they just get no play, which really is why I dipped them down. I think they might have been in mid-tier of C, but this really moved them down, obviously. And just the last season really didn't get much play at all, because of, if you're playing Shaman, you're probably playing either Resto or playing Elemental. So that is the Shamans done. And now we're on to Feral Druid. Feral Druid. I hope no one really is going to be offended by this, but they were not getting any play through the whole. I was very lenient because I actually don't mind Feral, but it's probably a bit biased to be honest. I gave them D throughout the first 3 seasons. I just gave them a C just so they didn't feel so bad. But I looked through the first 1,000 tiers for every season, and Feral, there was not one single key, because everyone that was playing Druid was either Guardian, Resto, Guardian, Resto, or obviously Boomy, right? So, and there was no play on Feral in the top 1,000 keys done. Top 1,000, right? Now you could say I probably didn't need to go back that far, which you're probably right. I probably only need to do the first top rank 200 or something like that to sort of get a feel for things. But I wanted to get a feel for where these things, because if I'm going to put something into D, we're obviously saying these specs were not brought at all, right? In the high keys doesn't mean they weren't getting played in your normal weekly sort of run stuff, right? But yeah, for the most part, Feral, I didn't find one key through any of the seasons where Feral was brought at all in the higher keys, which, surprising, because a lot of the other specs that are in A or in, obviously Affliction Warlock as well, these are damage over time effects, ramps, them type of things. You got Fire, Destruction, Assassination, Boomy, and obviously Affliction. These are all ramped base type specs, and you think maybe Feral in this environment might actually benefit from this, but it's not the case. Also doing other research, because I was quite surprised that Feral wasn't played much. People that are going around and just sort of speaking to a few other people that were playing at a high level back then, Feral just felt clunky, and its AoE was very clunky, and obviously in Mythic Plus that is a lot of the dungeons. A lot of the dungeon is doing AoE, and the AoE back then didn't feel great. Now let's move on to Frost DK. Frost DK is also, unfortunately, it actually doesn't start off too bad. It starts off around about a C, but unfortunately you're either playing Blood or Unholy in the higher keys, and Frost didn't really have much play. Now it's not as bad as Feral, where it had no play. It did have some play, but it didn't have a lot of play, and unfortunately I think in the first season they had kind of about the same play, but Unholy sort of pulled ahead in the first season, but then after that Unholy just pulled away, and so we have Frost DK, who's just sort of stuck in the mud, and I might be honest, I don't really remember if Frost in any season of any Mythic Plus rotation has been good. We'll see when we go over BFA, when we go over Shadowlands. I certainly don't remember them being any good in Shadowlands, and I certainly don't remember them being that great in Dragonflight. But obviously, they probably can play the legendary, so you know there is that too. This one, this is my spec. So this is my spec. I'm a Fury main. I'm a Warrior main, so I play all the specs, but I'm mostly Fury. I enjoy Fury. I enjoy the two-hand aspects of Fury. I've played every version of Fury that there is. You know, obviously I've gone back and played Classic. I've gone back and played TBC, and I've played them all like that version. And actually, when I first started playing in 2016, it was a Fury Warrior that I started playing, and I just fell in love with the play style of it. Right, it's very simple. It's very simple, and it's got one basic thing: charge in and start swinging. As Arms is sort of, you know, a slower type, methodical type attacks, I suppose, as Fury is all about speed, and obviously there's a bleed aspect to Arms as well, but Fury actually started off really poorly. That one. They actually started off really poorly, and then as the expansion went on, they were probably the most improved throughout the expansion, and they eventually moved up to B, and then eventually actually probably outplayed a Frost Mage. They were getting a lot of play in some of the higher keys. Now they went better than Arms at that point, and pretty much through the entire expansion, apart from probably the last season where Fury Warriors, and this is why I did move them up to A. You could argue that they're B, and maybe I'm coming from bias, but just going over the stats of the last season, it did boost them from a B to an A, and Frost Mage didn't really get much play in the last season, so it kind of boosted them up. And Arms is still probably better, but it just got less play. I think there might have been some sort of buffs and stuff to Fury going into the last season. Sorry, but yeah, Fury an A tier. Let me know if I'm being biased in the comments. So now we got Havoc Demon Hunter. Obviously, this is the expansion that DHs came in. Demon Hunters, sorry. And so I actually think Havoc encapsulates what a Demon Hunter's supposed to be. It's very class fantasy is pretty much fulfilled. It's very good throughout this expansion. And so when they bring out a new class, and so they need to represent what they're supposed to, that they want, right? For that expansion, they should be OP, DKs and Wrath. I don't know about how good monks were. I haven't done my research on that. But obviously DHs, Evokers in Dragonflight, right? Specifically Augmentation, they are super good. But they want their spec or their class to be really good. And Havoc actually is pretty good throughout the whole expansion. They are actually better than Fury. Consistently better. They got a lot of play. They had a dip in season 3. They did some, obviously, again, we're still doing some of the highest keys in the world. Between that and Vengeance, they were sort of doing some of the higher keys in the world, and it probably is a good indication that Havoc was probably one of the better specs that they brought into the game. I think it's still World of Warcraft. I think my opinion has varied, I suppose, from Evokers being in the game, and I suppose monks, their ties to the game are fine, but pandas not being very wowish, but they tie in very well. Evokers, I don't think really tie in, but there is some lore behind it there, so you know there is that. So, but yeah, I think they really it's probably one of the funner. It's very fast paced, so it's especially now, obviously modern WoW. But yeah, Ret Paladins. So this is a very big. This is a very fun spec to play, although my opinion is that they're just a warrior with holy abilities, but they it's that pussy shit, you know. But anyway, I'm a warrior. Warriors are like, it's their arch rival, right? So you know you can't really. But Ret Paladins actually started off the expansion pretty well, probably around a B. They were getting some play in higher keys, not a lot of play. A lot of the play was getting through pop. Like Paladins did get a lot of play, but they were mostly prop Paladins or Holy Paladins. So for the most part, you know, they are getting a C. They dipped later in the expansion, and obviously last season there was a lot of play towards other specs, and but yeah, I mean, a pretty solid. They was like these CTs are they would still do their 20s and be fine, right? Like, and even the Ds, they could still do 20s and be fine. I reckon so. You know, that would have been fine. But yeah, Shadow Priest. Oh boy, this is not a Shadow Priest expansion that we have come to be used to over the Dragonflight expansion. Shadow Priest probably started around a C for the expansion, for the first half of the expansion, and then just really didn't get much play, and mostly dominated by Holy Priests. But yeah, that there's not much to say. The class fantasy wise, they probably were in an A tier type, but in terms of meta and key pushing, Shadow Priests are about there. Subtlety Rogue. Subtlety Rogue is one of the best specs in the entire game. It is a borderline S tier. And you know, the classes, the specs that I think could be an S tier, I've just been a bit more restrictive on who I put into that threshold. Boomies, Subtlety. You could make the argument for Assassination, Marksman, Fire Mage. You could all chuck those in there, even Destruction. But I didn't want to overflood this because I feel like this is a very specific row, right? But yeah, Subtlety is like one of the best specs in the game. It actually pulled ahead in Season 3, and it was probably like was S tier for that, and then dipped down. Assassination rose back up and closed the gap a little bit there. I mean, generally, Rogue throughout the whole expansion, no matter what specs you picked, you was probably still doing some of the higher keys in the world, especially for the first 3 seasons. Unholy DK. Now, Unholy DK is a B tier spec, and I think I'm pretty lenient on that. They were similar to a Shaman's, where they were in the keys. Like, there were some keys they were doing through the top 1,000, but they weren't there consistently enough, right? There were a lot of overtime keys. There were a lot of keys that, when I looked at overtime keys, there were a lot of Shamans in those ones. Oh, sorry about that. There were a lot of times where Shamans were not being played. Like, you know, if you look through the rankings, you can see that they're probably every 10 to 15, there's a Shaman in there, and then another 20 or so away, and there's another Shaman in there. And it's the same sort of story with DKs in keys. Unholy had more play than Frost, and probably about the same amount in terms of, I mean, I would assume Blood had more play. It's probably more of a popular spec, especially for people that love the tank. Blood's aesthetic is awesome. It's designed beautifully, and so is Unholy. Personally, I like Unholy more than Frost, but not as much as Blood. And that's coming from a DPS player. Okay, last spec, Windwalker Monk. This is very interesting. This was actually a big surprise. They started out as a B tier spec, and then they got almost no play for Season 2 and Season 3, and then I'm assuming, I haven't gone and researched Windwalker Monk, but they went from a Season 3 where I listed them on my list as a D, and they went to an S. So I had to find a middle ground. How can I chuck Windwalker into A? Now you could chuck Windwalker into A, but I chucked it into the top of B due to their last season just popping them back up. So I think the lowest I put them was a C, but I did list them as a D. Their season where they started was a B, dropped to a C, dropped to a D in terms of playtime, and then they went to an S. They were in season 4. They were in literally every single key there was. So you know, they either got a rework or just a lot of buffs, and they just got a lot of play. And it also could be that a lot of the season 4 content just got evaporated no matter what you were playing. But that is the tier list for today, guys. I'll probably do a tank one next. But yeah, look, this is exciting because we're coming into a new World of Warcraft expansion. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. I hope you comment and like and stuff like that, and hopefully subscribe. If you want to ever check me out, I'm over on Twitch at Keatsy over there. So there should be a link either in the description of this video, but I also over there, my main is going to be Fury, obviously. Not my main. I'll like a Holy Paladin and Resto Shaman or something like that for the new expansion, and we'll see if Affliction's going to stay where it is. If it is, I will probably alt that as well at some point. But yeah, this is the Legion. We'll do the tank and healers in 2 separate videos, and I can talk more deeply about those then, and then we'll get on to BFA DPS. And yeah, I mean, guys, it's been a nice few days sort of researching all this stuff. It's taken me a while to sort of get this all stuff sort of organized. So I know it's a longer video, but I hope you guys like it. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.